The intergalactic hub on planet Varenthia buzzed with energy as delegates from various planets gathered, their voices mingling into a symphony of the cosmos. Prince Zorlex, with his sharp features and ceremonial attire, stood atop the grand balcony of the hub overlooking the arrivals with a mixture of curiosity and indifference. His advisor, Malix, a seasoned diplomat with keen eyes, joined him, pointing out the newly arrived human delegation. "Your Highness, those are the humans." "Quite. A young species to join the interstellar community." Zorlex's gaze followed the group as they navigated through the crowd, led by a man whose presence seemed to command attention despite his unassuming stature. He was introduced as James Holden, the lead diplomat. Beside him was Ava, a linguist and cultural attaché, her eyes wide with fascination at the alien architecture. As the humans approached, Zorlex descended the steps to greet them, his voice smooth but laced with a barely concealed arrogance. "Welcome to Varenthia, delegates. I trust your journey was comfortable." James extended his hand, a human gesture of goodwill, which Zorlex hesitated only momentarily before accepting. "Thank you, Prince Zorlex. We are honored to be here and eager to learn from such an advanced civilization." Ava stepped forward, her tone respectful yet confident. "Your world is renowned for its contributions to the Galactic Senate. We hope to share knowledge and perhaps offer insights of our own." Zorlex smiled thinly, amused by her boldness. "Indeed, humanity has much to prove. What insights could such a young species offer to those of us who have charted the stars?" For millennia, noticing the slight tension, Malix interjected smoothly, "Perhaps a tour of our capital would be an excellent start to your visit. There's much to be appreciated about Varenthian culture through our city's design and daily life." "An excellent suggestion," Ava agreed, her enthusiasm undimmed by Zorlex's skepticism. "We are here to observe and learn, after all." As they walked through the sprawling complex of the hub, Zorlex led them through halls adorned with artifacts from across the galaxy. He explained their historical significance, his voice a mix of pride and rote formality. James listened intently, asking pointed questions that demonstrated a surprising depth of pre-arrival study. Ava, meanwhile, kept pace with Zorlex, her observations about Varenthian art prompting thoughtful expressions from the prince. "Your artistry seems to reflect a deep appreciation for the natural world. It's quite similar to human artistic expressions derived from nature." Zorlex looked at her, his initial amusement giving way to a hint of respect. "You are observant. Ms. Ava, perhaps there is more to humanity than I initially surmised." Their exchange was interrupted by a commotion at the far end of the hall, where a group of Yaltrix merchants loudly disputed a trade agreement. Zorlex excused himself to address the issue, displaying a commanding presence that quickly resolved the dispute. James leaned towards Ava, whispering, "Seems like you made an impression." Ava watched Zorlex mediate, a small smile playing on her lips. Maybe. Or maybe he's just never met a human who could hold their own in conversation before. As they resumed their tour, Zorlex returned to them, his expression more thoughtful than before. "I look forward to seeing what else your delegation has to offer, Miss Ava, Mr. Holden." With a shared look of determination, Ava and James nodded. The first day of their visit had laid the groundwork for what they hoped would be a meaningful exchange. Little did they know it was just the beginning of a transformative journey for both humanity and the prince who had once laughed at their potential. Chapter 2. The Feast of Galaxies. The grand hall of the Varenthian palace shimmered with the light of countless crystal chandeliers, their glow reflecting off walls of polished starstone. Rows of tables groaned under the weight of interstellar delicacies, each platter a work of art as much as a meal. The air buzzed with conversations in a dozen alien tongues blending into a melody that could only be found at the Feast of Galaxies. Prince Zorlex entered the hall with his usual confident stride, his elaborate robes swirling around him, his Closest friend and advisor, Malix, walked beside him, scanning the room for notable guests. "A promising turnout," Malix said under his breath. "The humans have drawn more interest than I expected." Zorlex smirked. "I see that James Holden and Ava are already seated. Perhaps our young species has a flair for punctuality." As Zorlex and Malix approached their seats, Zorlex noticed James engaged in a lively discussion with Ambassador Salvon of the Vescarn. James gestured animatedly as he spoke, while Salvon's frilled crest bobbed in what appeared to be amusement. Ava, sitting next to James, glanced at Zorlex as he arrived, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Your Highness," James said, rising and offering a polite nod. "Thank you for hosting this extraordinary gathering. The cultural diversity on display here is remarkable." Zorlex inclined his head. "Mr. Holden, Ms. Ava, welcome. I trust you're finding our hospitality satisfactory." "Absolutely," James replied. "I was just telling Ambassador Zalvon how impressed I am with Varenthian cuisine. That dish with the glowing tendrils, what's it called again?" Malix smiled faintly. "A traditional Varenthian delicacy, known as Lumira vine. It's a favorite. At formal banquets," Ava leaned forward slightly, "I was admiring the presentation. Food is art. There's something universal about that, don't you think?" "Perhaps," Zorlex said, his tone carefully neutral. "Though I wonder if your species can truly appreciate the complexities of our culinary traditions." James chuckled. "Only one way to find out, shall we?" The group began serving themselves from the platters, and Zorlex found himself surprised by James's genuine curiosity about Varenthian cuisine. As they ate, the conversation shifted to interstellar politics. James asked pointed, insightful questions about the Galactic Senate's latest initiatives, impressing even Malix with his grasp of galactic trade routes and resource allocations. "I'm curious," James said between bites of Lumira vine. "How does Varenthia balance such rapid technological advancement with maintaining its cultural heritage?" "I imagine there's a fine line between embracing progress and losing touch with tradition." Zorlex set down his glass of crystallized nectar, regarding James thoughtfully. "It is a delicate balance, one that requires constant vigilance. But tell me, Mr. Holden, does humanity face similar challenges? You are, after all, a relatively young race in the galactic arena." James nodded, choosing his words carefully. "We do, in our own way. The speed of our technological growth sometimes outpaces our ability to adapt socially and culturally, but that's where our greatest strength lies, our willingness to learn, adapt, and find common ground." "Common ground," Zorlex repeated, as if tasting the phrase. "An admirable ideal. We Varenthians, too, value the pursuit of common ground. It is the foundation of our planetary unity." "Unity," James said. "That's something we're still working on." Malix glanced at Zorlex, who gave a subtle nod. "Perhaps a demonstration would be enlightening," Zorlex said. "Malix, bring the Varenthian chess set." Ava's eyes lit up. "Varenthian chess? I've heard about this. It's supposed to be one of the most complex strategy games in the galaxy." Malix returned moments later with a finely crafted chess set, its pieces glowing faintly with embedded crystals. The board itself seemed to shift and shimmer, its grid reconfiguring every few seconds. "Fascinating," James murmured. As Malix explained the rules, Zorlex gestured toward the board. "Would you care to play a round, Mr. Holden?" James grinned. "Absolutely. I'll give it my best shot." As the two men settled into the game, Ava and Malix observed quietly. The match started evenly, with James quickly grasping the basics and making thoughtful moves. Zorlex played with practiced precision, his strategy unfolding with calculated grace. Halfway through the game, James leaned back and said, "Your Highness, I have to admit, this game is as much about reading your opponent as it is about the pieces on the board. I think I'm starting to see why it's so highly regarded." "Then let's see if you can read me," Zorlex replied, moving a luminous piece to a critical position. James studied the board, his expression shifting from concentration to a sly grin. Well, in that case, he made his move, and Zorlex's brow furrowed slightly. Check. Ava stifled a laugh. Not bad for a first-time player? Zorlex's eyes narrowed as he scanned the board. Interesting. I may have underestimated your strategic thinking, Mr. Holden. As the game progressed, it became clear that James had no intention of making it easy for Zorlex. The moves grew more intricate, the counters more creative. By the time the game reached its conclusion, the two men were both leaning forward, their competitive spirits fully engaged. In the end, Zorlex claimed victory, but only by a narrow margin. He extended a hand to James, who shook it firmly. An impressive first game. I look forward to seeing how you improve. James grinned. Thank you, Your Highness. I'll definitely be practicing. The match had shifted the atmosphere at the table. The initial formality was replaced with a sense of mutual respect, the beginnings of a camaraderie that neither man had expected. For Zorlex, it was the first time he truly began to see humanity as more than a novelty. For James, it was a reminder that even in the vastness of the galaxy, common ground could be found over something as simple and complex as a game. Chapter 3. Through the markets of Mizar, the city of Mizar unfolded before them like a tapestry of life and light, its multi-tiered streets bustling with vendors and visitors from every corner of the galaxy. The smell of exotic spices mingled with the faint tang of ozone from distant energy fields. Overhead, floating platforms carried both goods and people, weaving in intricate patterns through the skyline. Prince Zorlex glanced at James Holden, who stood beside him at the edge of a balcony overlooking the central market square. You wanted to see how our people live beyond the walls of the palace, Zorlex said. This is Mizar. James rested his arms on the balcony rail, taking in the scene. It's incredible. There's a kind of vibrancy to it, like every corner has a story waiting to be discovered. I suppose that's one way to look at it, Zorlex replied, his tone mildly amused. Although I find it chaotic at times, Varenthia prides itself on order, yet here in Mizar, things seem to operate on a rhythm of their own. James grinned. Some of the best discoveries come out of a little chaos. Let's go explore. Zorlex nodded, and the two men descended into the throng. As they walked, James noticed how Varenthian children darted between stalls, their laughter echoing through the narrow streets. Merchants called out in melodic tones, offering wares that ranged from shimmering fabrics to strange crystalline objects that pulsed faintly with light. Prince Zorlex? A pleasure to see you, one merchant exclaimed, bowing deeply. His booth was lined with intricately carved metalwork, some pieces no larger than a human's palm. Marion, Zorlex greeted him with a curt nod. Your work remains as impressive as ever. James leaned in to inspect a small intricate sculpture that seemed to shift form as he turned it in his hands. What is this made from? He asked. Ah, a curious human, Marion said, his frills expanding slightly in excitement. That is night steel, mined from the dark side of a Varenthian moon. It reacts to the subtle electromagnetic fields around it, changing shape as you move it. James placed it back gently. That's remarkable. A material like this could have so many applications. Do you export it? Marion looked to Zorlex, who replied, It's rare, and the process to harvest it is delicate. We prefer to keep it within our own artisans' hands for now. They moved on, passing stalls that displayed everything from vibrant, glowing flowers to delicately tuned musical instruments that emitted notes when touched. James noticed Zorlex watching him closely, as though trying to gauge his reaction to each new discovery. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Zorlex said after a while. Absolutely, James replied. This market, it's alive. I could spend hours here just learning from everyone I meet. Zorlex raised an eyebrow. Hours in a market? Most visitors find it overwhelming after a short time. Then they're not looking closely enough, James said, pausing at a booth selling what appeared to be small orbs of light trapped within clear spheres. What are these? The merchant, a slender Varenthian with a long, delicate tail, explained, these are star whisper orbs. They capture the ambient light from dying stars and preserve it as a keepsake. Many find them soothing, a reminder of the beauty that remains even after a star's life ends. James turned the orb over in his hands, marveling at the way the light within seemed to swirl and shift. I can see why someone would want to keep this close. As they continued through the market, Zorlex began to point out details that James might have missed. The subtle color changes in the fabric stalls that indicated different weavers, the way certain vendors displayed their goods to reflect the positioning of Mizar's sons. James listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest in the culture and traditions of Varenthia. You see, Zorlex said after a time, this is what makes Mizar unique. It's not just a marketplace. It's a reflection of our people's ingenuity and creativity. James nodded. It's like looking into the soul of your planet. You learn so much about a society by how they trade, what they value, and how they present themselves. They stopped at a small cafe nestled in a quiet corner of the market. The owner, a plump Varenthian with soft green skin and wide eyes, welcomed them warmly and offered them a local delicacy called Lumara petals. The thin, translucent petals dissolved on the tongue, leaving behind a subtle, floral sweetness. You should try it, Zorlex said, watching as James hesitated. Why? Not? James said, popping one into his mouth. His eyebrows shot up as the flavor unfolded. Wow, that's delicate and complex. Not at all what I was expecting. Zorlex chuckled. There's more to Varenthian cuisine than what you saw at the palace banquet. James leaned back in his seat, letting the atmosphere of the cafe wash over him. This is exactly why I wanted to come here, to places like Mizar. It's one thing to read about a culture in a briefing. It's another to experience it firsthand. Zorlex folded his hands on the table. And what do you think of what you've experienced so far? I think, James said, meeting Zorlex's gaze, that I'm starting to understand how much humanity has to learn, but also how much we might have to offer. The two men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each reflecting on the journey so far. In that bustling, chaotic market, they found a common ground, a place where curiosity and mutual respect began to bridge the vast distances between their worlds. Chapter 4. The Challenge. The air was thinner on the cliffs of Verthen, where ancient ruins stood weathered by time and wind. Zorlex adjusted his balance on the uneven terrain, his boots crunching against the rough mineral-streaked stone. James, slightly out of breath but determined to keep pace, scanned the landscape with wide-eyed curiosity. These ruins, James began, his voice steady despite the climb. How far back do they go? Thousands of years, Zorlex replied, motioning toward a row of crumbling stone arches. They were built long before our current civilization rose. Scholars still debate their original purpose, though most agree they were some kind of sanctuary. Sanctuary? James stepped closer to one of the arches, brushing his hand lightly along the faded carvings. It's amazing. The details. Look at these markings. It's almost like a language? Some believe they were symbols used in early meditation rites, Zorlex said. Others think they marked paths to hidden chambers within the cliffs. James straightened, turning to Zorlex. You must have studied these growing up. Zorlex nodded. As part of my education, yes. But there's always more to learn. That's part of the reason I brought you here. Seeing them in person can change how you understand them. The sound of a distant breeze carried a faint hum from the canyon below, a natural resonance that seemed to wrap around the ruins. James smiled faintly. I can see why they chose this place. It feels different, like it's alive. That's what draws many of us here, Zorlex admitted. It's a place to think, to reflect. As they approached a low stone platform, At the center of the site, Zorlex gestured for James to stop. This is where the tests were held. Tests? James raised an eyebrow. Not for power or strength, Zorlex clarified. For insight. They say that standing on the platform at sunset, focusing on the hum from the canyon, could reveal something about yourself. It's an old Varenthian belief, but the tradition has persisted. James stepped up onto the platform without hesitation. He looked back at Zorlex. Any advice? Just listen, Zorlex said, folding his arms. And be patient. The two men fell silent as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the ruins. The hum from the canyon grew slightly louder, resonating through the stones and filling the air with a deep, almost melodic vibration. James stood still, his expression thoughtful, as if the sound were pulling him into a meditative state. You feel it? Zorlex asked quietly. James nodded. It's strange, but not unpleasant, almost like it's speaking to me. That's what many say. It's not about words, though, Zorlex explained. It's about what you see within yourself. The moment stretched on, and James remained on the platform, his breathing slow and steady. When he finally stepped down, his face held a quiet, contemplative look. Well? Zorlex asked. James shook his head. I don't know if I saw anything, exactly, but I feel clearer, like I know what I need to focus on. That's all it's meant to do, Zorlex said. Sometimes that clarity is all you need. As they left the ruins, the sun disappeared behind the cliffs, and stars began to emerge. The walk back to their transport was peaceful, the earlier tension from their climb replaced by a sense of camaraderie. James glanced over at Zorlex, the prince's silhouette outlined against the darkening sky. Thanks for bringing me here, James said. It's not what I expected, but I think I understand why it's important to you. Zorlex gave a faint smile. You came with an open mind. That's more than most would do, and it's why you'll see more than most. James chuckled softly. High praise coming from you. Don't let it go to your head, Zorlex replied, his tone light. We have more to explore tomorrow. Consider this a small step in a much longer journey. As they boarded their vehicle, the ruins of Verthen faded into the night, but their echoes lingered in James's thoughts. The experience had been more than a test. It had been a moment of connection, a chance to see his own path more clearly and to understand the bond that was slowly forming between two very different individuals. Chapter 5. The Gala of Stars. Celestial Harmony, an enormous interstellar cruiser designed for diplomatic events, hung in orbit above Varenthia. Its mirrored hull reflected the light of nearby stars, creating an illusion of a vessel formed from pure starlight. The central ballroom was no less dazzling. A dome of transparent crystalline panels revealed the heavens above, casting a gentle silver glow onto the finely dressed guests below. Zorlex arrived wearing formal Varenthian attire, a long, flowing robe adorned with intricate glowing patterns that shimmered faintly as he moved. Beside him walked James Holden, dressed in a tailored suit of midnight blue that subtly matched the ship's celestial theme. The two had spent the last few days in close collaboration, and a growing sense of mutual respect had replaced their initial wariness. It's impressive, James said, nodding toward the towering floral arrangements that lined the room. The blooms were suspended in mid-air, their vibrant colors shifting in slow, rhythmic patterns. I've never seen decorations that actually change. They're a native species from the shadowed hemisphere of Varenthia's largest moon, Zorlex explained. They react to light and sound, adapting their colors to the atmosphere of the room. James grinned. So, even your flowers are sophisticated. I can see why humans might feel a little out of place here. Zorlex glanced at him, his expression unreadable. You don't seem out of place at all. In fact, you appear more at ease than many seasoned diplomats. James shrugged. I've found that a genuine smile and a few honest questions go a long way. People like to feel seen. The two moved through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings and light conversation. The room was a kaleidoscope of alien dignitaries, each species adding its unique flair to the evening. Tall, crystalline figures from the Azurial Alliance floated gracefully above the floor, while armored Ulthian warriors stood stoically near the edges, their formidable presence softened by the shimmering fabrics they wore. Eventually they reached a small, elevated platform where a live performance was about to begin. A Varenthian musical ensemble played instruments that emitted soft, glowing orbs of light as they were struck, the melodies blending harmoniously into an ethereal symphony. Zorlex and James stood side by side, both drawn into the haunting beauty of the music. As the final notes faded, James turned to Zorlex. "It's breathtaking. Music like this, there's nothing quite like it on Earth. I can't even imagine how it's composed." Zorlex gave a slight nod. "It's a collaboration between Varenthian artists and our natural world. The orbs are made from a rare crystal that resonates with certain frequencies. The musicians simply guide what the crystals already wish to sing." James laughed softly. "Even your music is a partnership. It makes me wonder what else humans have yet to learn about our place in the universe." Zorlex tilted his head. "You are quick to acknowledge your species' limits. Yet I've seen in you a willingness to adapt, to learn. That is not something every race possesses." Before James could respond, a Varenthian diplomat approached, bowing deeply to Zorlex. "Your Highness, we are preparing for the traditional ceremonial dance. Would you like to join the opening procession?" Zorlex looked to James. "A human perspective might be enlightening. Shall we?" James hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Why not? I'm already out of my depth. Might as well dive in all the way?" The two men stepped onto the dance floor, where lines of Varenthian dignitaries arranged themselves in precise formations. The music shifted to a slower, more deliberate rhythm, and the guests began to move in unison, their steps creating a mesmerizing pattern that rippled outward like waves. At first, James stumbled slightly, unfamiliar with the intricate timing and steps. Zorlex offered quiet guidance, and before long, James found a rhythm of his own. The room seemed to glow brighter as the dancers moved, the shifting colors of their garments blending into a living mosaic. By the time the dance ended, James was breathing a little heavier, but his face was lit with exhilaration. "That was incredible. I can see why it's a tradition." Zorlex smiled faintly. "It is one of our oldest customs. To move as one with others, to become part of something larger than oneself, is at the heart of what it means to be Varenthian." James met Zorlex's gaze. "I think I'm starting to understand that, and I think humans can learn from it." They stepped off the dance floor and were soon joined by Malix, who had been observing from the sidelines. "It's not every day we see a human take part in a Varenthian ceremonial dance," Malix said with a small smile. "You handled yourself well, Mr. Holden." "Thanks," James replied. "I'll admit, I had a good teacher." Zorlex inclined his head slightly, accepting the compliment without further comment. The three men moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom, where a table of refreshments awaited. They each took a glass of a sparkling Varenthian beverage that shifted colors as it caught the light. "To partnership," James said, raising his glass. Zorlex hesitated for a moment, then mirrored the gesture. "To the possibilities that come from understanding each other." Malix raised his glass as well, though his expression remained more reserved. "To new perspectives." The glasses clinked, and the three men drank. As the gala continued around them, they stood together, a small circle of shared experiences and mutual respect. It was not a night of grand declarations or dramatic breakthroughs, but one of quiet connections and small steps toward a future shaped by cooperation. Under the dome of stars, the celestial harmony became more than a vessel. It became a space, where differences began to fade, where common ground was not just a goal, but a reality taking shape in the simple shared moments of an extraordinary evening. Chapter 6. The The secret revealed. The royal archives of Varenthia were not easily accessible. High within the palace's eastern spire, the entrance was guarded by a massive door engraved with intricate patterns that glimmered faintly in the dim light. Behind that door lay countless shelves and vaults containing centuries of knowledge, texts, artifacts, and recordings from Varenthia's long history. Zorlex led James through the cavernous chamber, their footsteps echoing softly off the polished floor. Towering columns lined the room, each carved with symbols that shifted as if alive. The air felt charged, heavy with the presence of ancient wisdom. For James, the archives were more than a treasure trove. They were a chance to understand the cultural foundation of the Varenthian people. For Zorlex, the visit was something different, a step toward trust. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to bring me here," James admitted, as he paused to examine a collection of glowing crystalline tablets on a nearby pedestal. Zorlex stopped beside him, his gaze steady. "You've shown respect for our ways and a genuine desire to learn. That is not something I take lightly. Besides, you've proven to be a worthy conversation partner. It's only fair I give you a closer look." James chuckled. "High praise coming from you, so what's the big secret hidden here? What don't the rest of us know?" "It's not about a single secret," Zorlex said, gesturing to the shelves. "It's about understanding how the threads of our past weave into the present. These archives are not just records, they are our foundation." As they walked further into the chamber, Zorlex led James to a central dais where a large circular console stood. Its surface shimmered, displaying symbols that morphed and rearranged themselves as Zorlex touched the controls. The prince paused for a moment before selecting a specific sequence. A section of the floor nearby began to shift, rising to reveal a small sealed container. James raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Zorlex removed the container, placing it carefully on a nearby table. He opened it to reveal a series of thin metallic sheets etched with minutely precise characters. "These are among the oldest artifacts we have. They're believed to predate our recorded history. But what's most intriguing is that some of the symbols bear a striking resemblance to early human script." James frowned, leaning in for a closer look. "You're saying these were made before your people had written language?" "Precisely," Zorlex confirmed. "When these were first discovered, no one could decipher them. But when humanity began to engage with the Galactic Senate, we noticed the similarities. It's led to theories that our ancestors might have had contact with humans, or at least a species that influenced both of our worlds, long before we realized it." James studied the sheets carefully. It changes how we see each other. It's not just humanity reaching out to a more advanced civilization. It's a shared history waiting to be uncovered." Zorlex nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I thought you might see it that way." They spent hours examining the sheets, discussing the possible implications of what they'd found. James asked question after question, his curiosity unrelenting, while Zorlex answered with a mixture of academic precision and personal insight. Each exchange deepened their understanding, not only of the artifacts, but of each other. Eventually, James leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "It's almost too much to take in. If these artifacts really show a link between our species, it means humanity isn't just a newcomer to the galaxy. We're part of a much older story." "That's one interpretation," Zorlex said. "But it also raises questions. If there was contact, what happened? Why was it lost? And what does it mean for our relationship now?" James glanced at Zorlex, his expression serious. "It means we have a responsibility to understand, to learn from the past, maybe even to rebuild what was once there." Zorlex studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then it seems we have work to do." As the two men stood to leave, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of something monumental. The Varenthian archives were no longer just a repository of knowledge. They were a bridge between two civilizations, one that could redefine their future. Chapter 7. The turning tide. The planetary council chambers buzzed with a low hum of voices, each faction murmuring in their native tongue. The circular room, lined with cascading strands of glowing crystal, was a stage where every move and word would be scrutinized. Prince Zorlex and James Holden stood side by side at the chamber's central podium, their presence drawing the attention of dozens of Varenthian senators and a smattering of foreign diplomats. The lead senator, a stern figure named Orcs, raised a hand to silence the room. Prince Zorlex, you have requested this session to discuss the growing relationship between Varenthia and the human delegation. Many among us remain skeptical. Speak your case. Zorlex stepped forward, his robe flowing behind him as he addressed the assembly. Distinguished senators, for centuries, Varenthia has stood as a pillar of progress in this galaxy. We have welcomed other species into our councils, formed alliances, and advanced as a unified world. Yet humanity, young and untested, has presented us with an unexpected opportunity. He gestured toward James. I have spent time with these humans, and while I too held doubts, what I have seen in Mr. Holden and his delegation is something we cannot ignore. They possess an eagerness to learn, a willingness to adapt, and most importantly, a capacity for innovation that rivals any of our allied species. James stepped up, nodding respectfully to Orcs. Your Excellency and honored senators, I understand the skepticism. Humanity is young on the galactic stage, but every great civilization starts somewhere. We're not here to impose our ways or demand more than we've earned. We're here to collaborate, to share what we know, and to grow alongside you. A senator with an ornate silver crest rose. And what exactly can humanity offer us, Mr. Holden? Your technology is crude compared to ours. Your history is riddled with conflict. Why should we align ourselves with such a species? James met the senator's gaze evenly. You're right. Our technology lags behind, and our history has its darker chapters. But those struggles taught us resilience, and that's something we can share, not as a model to follow, but as a perspective to consider. In our short time here, we've already learned from Varenthian diplomacy and innovation. Imagine what we might achieve together if we combined our strengths. Orcs leaned forward. Prince Zorlex, you have always advocated for caution. Why the sudden change of heart? Zorlex squared his shoulders. It is not sudden. It is the result of witnessing the value of open dialogue. In working with Mr. Holden, I have come to understand that humanity's potential lies not in their current state, but in their willingness to improve. They are eager students, and we, Varenthia, have always been proud teachers. Another senator spoke up, his tone skeptical. This sounds more like charity than partnership. If they have nothing to offer us now, why should we waste our resources on them? James stepped forward again, his voice steady. Because we're not asking for charity, we're offering collaboration. Humanity brings a fresh perspective, new approaches to old problems, and a drive to innovate in ways that even advanced civilizations might overlook. We're not asking for handouts, we're asking for a seat at the table where we can learn and contribute equally. The room fell quiet for a moment as the senators considered his words. Zorlex seized the opportunity. We have faced challenges together before, forging bonds with species who were once strangers. Humanity is no different. They are at the start of their journey, but their presence here reminds us of what we were when we first stepped onto the Iron galactic stage. Do we not owe it to ourselves and to them to see where this partnership can lead? Orcs glanced around the room, gauging the senators' reactions. Some nodded thoughtfully, others remained impassive. Your arguments are compelling, Prince Zorlex, Mr. Holden, but words alone will not sway this council. What assurances can you provide that humanity's involvement will not diminish Varenthian influence or resources? James looked to Zorlex, and the prince gave him a slight nod. We propose a joint initiative, James said, a project that combines Varenthian knowledge with human ingenuity, something measurable, perhaps a technological exchange or a collaborative research mission, so you can see the results firsthand before making any long-term commitments. A senator with golden ridges raised a hand. And who would oversee this initiative? I would, Zorlex said firmly. With input from both Varenthian and human representatives, we would ensure transparency and maintain the integrity of our traditions. The murmurs returned, but this time they carried a note of curiosity. Ulvrex looked down at his notes, then back at the pair. Very well. This council will deliberate. If a majority agrees, we will authorize a trial collaboration. But be warned, if humanity proves to be more burden than benefit, the agreement will be rescinded. Zorlex inclined his head. Understood, Your Excellency. James nodded as well. We appreciate your consideration. Whatever the decision, we remain committed to learning and contributing as best we can. The council session ended with a low hum as the senators departed to their chambers. Zorlex and James stood together, watching the room empty. You handled that well, Zorlex said. James smiled faintly. I think we both did, but this is just the beginning, isn't it? Indeed, Zorlex replied. The real work starts now. But you've proven something important today, Mr. Holden. What's that? James asked. Zorlex gave him a small, knowing smile. That humanity's presence is more than an accident. It's a catalyst, one I'm willing to see through. The two men left the council chambers together, their steps steady and their purpose clear. Chapter 8. Unity Forged. The newly built Intergalactic Liaison Office sat atop one of the most scenic plateaus on Varenthia, its sleek architecture blending seamlessly into the surrounding environment. The main hall, adorned with both Varenthian and human symbols, buzzed with activity as representatives from both species gathered for the inaugural ceremony. Outside, the twin suns cast a warm golden light over the gathering, giving the event an almost celebratory glow. Zorlex stood near the central dais, watching as a stream of human and Varenthian dignitaries mingled. James Holden was beside him, adjusting the collar of his formal attire as he surveyed the scene with a mix of pride and quiet determination. Quite the turnout, James said, glancing at Zorlex. You think this many people really care about a liaison office? It's more than an office, Zorlex replied. It's a symbol, an acknowledgement that our civilizations can work together as equals. James smiled faintly. I think that's the first time you've called us equals. Progress. Zorlex tilted his head. You've earned it. This was your vision as much as mine. They were joined by Malix, who carried a small ceremonial tablet. Everything is prepared, Your Highness. We'll begin as soon as the last delegation arrives. Thank you, Malix, Zorlex said, before turning to James. Shall we? The two men walked together to the dais, the crowd parting respectfully to let them pass. As they climbed the steps, a hush fell over the gathering. Zorlex stood at the podium. First, his voice calm but firm. Esteemed guests, colleagues, friends, he began, his gaze sweeping over the audience. Today marks a new chapter not only for Varenthia and humanity, but for the entire galaxy. This liaison office is more than a meeting place. It is a bridge built on mutual respect, understanding, and the belief that two very different species can achieve great things together. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, with a slight nod, he gestured to James. Mr. Holden. James stepped forward, meeting the audience's eyes with confidence. When humanity first reached out to the stars, we didn't know what to expect. We knew we were young, inexperienced, and often still finding our way. But the Varenthian people showed us something invaluable, the willingness to give us a chance. This office stands as proof that when we listen, when we learn, and when we work side by side, we can create something greater than ourselves. The room erupted into applause, and for a moment the two men exchanged a look that carried the unspoken acknowledgement of how far they had come. Zorlex raised a hand to quiet the crowd. We have much to do, Yamashtina, he said. Challenges will arise and differences will test us, but I have no doubt that together we will find solutions. Together we will continue to build a future worthy of both our peoples. After the speeches, the attendees moved to the networking areas of the office, where conversations buzzed with the excitement of new opportunities. James and Zorlex stayed together, engaging with various representatives and answering questions. Each exchange revealed how their partnership had inspired others. New collaborations were already being proposed, ranging from scientific ventures to cultural exchanges. At one point, James took a moment to step outside onto the terrace. The view was breathtaking. The plateau stretched out below, dotted with Varenthian wildflowers that shimmered in the fading light. The planet's 2 moons had risen, casting a gentle glow over the scene. Zorlex joined him after a few minutes of silence. "Enjoying the view?" James nodded. "It's peaceful. Hard to believe we're at the start of something so big." "It's rare to have both peace and purpose," Zorlex said, leaning against the railing. "But when you find it, it's worth holding on to." They stood quietly for a moment, the sounds of the gathering behind them, now a distant hum. James broke the silence with a quiet laugh. "You know, when I first arrived here, I never thought we'd end up standing here together like this. And I never thought I'd find a human worth standing beside," Zorlex replied, a hint of humor in his tone. "Yet here we are." James smiled. "Here we are." They turned back toward the gathering, walking shoulder to shoulder into the future they had helped create. Together,